Anyway, it's recording. Let's go. So I will do first in Russian. I would tell that you are a famous porn star, and then I switch to English.
Shit, that's on record. I can't believe I did that.
Всем привет! Это Асан Токс, подкаст, в котором я интервьюирую людей, которые создают невероятные вещи в мире и делают это в гармонии с собой. Сегодня у меня в гостях мой одноклассник Прабхакар Редди. Мы учились с ним в Коньково, шутка, в Гарвардской бизнес-школе. Праб – серийный предприниматель. Последние 15 лет он создает стартапы, и один из них он создал на стоимость более $3 миллиардов, и этот стартап уже работает в прибыль. И для меня Праб – это как раз пример серийного предпринимателя, с которым мне так интересно пообщаться, про то, как он выстраивает компании. Праб, let's switch to English. So first of all, I'm so excited to see you. For me, you are the person that I'm looking up to in a way that you created a couple of successful startups, and one of them was valued at like more than $3 billion. But it's not about even the $3 billion part. It's more about that you founded probably 3 or 4 companies, right? That you got to the exit or made them profitable. And that's something that I'm kind of looking up myself to do. And I'm just excited to see you. And my first question is, in 2018, you co-founded FalconX, digital assets brokerage, which was valued exactly at more than $3 billion in August 2021. Can you please share the story of how you founded the company and like the story of those first years and how the idea came up, how you met the co-founder? It would be amazing.
Sounds good. First of all, thank you for having me over, Asan. Good to do this with you. It's always fun to do podcast recording with friends. And hello everyone and all of Asan's listeners. So just to do a small correction, FalconX was last valued at $8 billion, not 3, but as of 2022. So very proud of the company and the team and where it's at. But to paint a picture of the journey for you, I think I'll have to take you back to the first encounter that I had with crypto. Right. My first encounter with crypto happened 10 years ago when we were still at business school in 2014, early 2014, when Bitcoin had crashed at this time from about $200, $300 to about $50, $60, because one of the largest exchanges back then called Mt. Gox had gotten hacked. And I used to monitor crypto just passively, and I was like, oh, this is such a great opportunity. Like things are very attractive right now. This doesn't seem to be, a normal reaction. I wired a bunch of money from then our HUVCU account, our Harvard Bank account, to purchase Bitcoin. About 3 weeks later, my wire was returned, so that purchase never happened. And I was like, it's not meant to be. And I got busy with all our graduation work and everything else, and that never happened. So that was my first brush with crypto. And then I kept actively monitoring crypto, but life, work, everything got busy. And then in 2016, after Ethereum launched, I started actively monitoring crypto again. A friend of mine from back then convinced me that it was too risky to purchase ETH because ETH had just gotten hacked again in 2016. But once I joined Excel in my role in 2016, I had some free times in the evening. So I created an Ethereum node. I got into Bitcoin and ETH. And I think it was just lucky, right place, right time, if anything. So Bitcoin went up like 10, 15x in the following months. ETH went up 100x. I started heavily trading across exchanges to the point where I think I was one of the top 10 traders on a couple of exchanges. And so learned a lot about the space, built a lot.
While you were at Excel, right? The Excel is the leading kind of private equity company in the world. It's like super famous. So while you were at Excel, you were trading like Bitcoins, right?
Correct. So Excel is a venture capital firm. Yeah, Excel is
venture
a
capital,
$15 billion venture capital firm. I used to be a VC. And the evenings in my spare time, I used to sit and trade crypto because, I was a 29-year-old kid with a lot of free time. So while doing that, fell in love with the space, fell in love with what the space had to offer. And, 2 years later, decided to leave Excel to basically pursue entrepreneurship and address my own pain points that I was facing as a crypto trader. And that's how the journey of FalconX began.
You even mentioned to me that, because I remember before Harvard Business School where we met, which was 2012, 2014, you already founded the company, right? Which was like the competitor to YouTube. You actually sold it successfully, right? And then you came. And then straight after Harvard Business School, you founded the company. And then you started working in Excel with the idea of actually searching for the next big thing, right? That was the logic?
No, so prior to business school, I had built two companies. First company I had started when I was still in undergrad was a blog, film and anime blog that I started with two of my classmates. Uh, you know, it started primarily to get out of poverty, if anything, right? We were just poor, broke college kids, and we wanted to make money to make a living. And again, got lucky, learned everything was self-taught, self-learned. 2006, 7, 8. This was around that time frame. By 2008, on the month of our graduation, we sold that blog for about 250,000. We're like, okay, you know what? This was peak.
250,000.
Yes. So this was peak recession.
Wow.
We were 21-year-old college kids. We realized, you know what? There's no reason for us to go take up a job anywhere. We actually can take our destiny in our own hands. Let's basically pursue entrepreneurship. So we were three folks out of a batch of 396 who decided to pursue entrepreneurship in the middle of a recession, saying, look, you know what? We don't want any job. It was a risky bet. Our parents were extremely unhappy about it. But in about 9 months after graduation, we were able to not just launch our next company, but turn it profitable and start taking the highest salaries amongst our entire batch. So then that's when our parents got off our back saying, okay, these guys are not like, one-time lucky guys. They actually know something. So that's how our journey, continued. This was the online video platform that we had begun. We grew that into in a couple of countries. We were in the top 3, top 5 most visited websites, and across the world, we were the top 100 most visited website. We were a high definition online video streaming portal, bootstrapped fully, with that 250K that we earned from our first sale, put that money, turned it into a profitable business. At peak, we were making about $15 million annually. So it was a good, legitimate business.
Was it like a profit or it was a revenue?
That was total top line revenue. And we were heavily profitable. Like, our infrastructure costs were high, but we were having about at least like 40% gross margin. So we were actually pretty good.
And you didn't raise any money. It was like one third, like to the three of you essentially.
Correct.
Wow.
We didn't have to raise
And
money.
then you sold it. And then you sold it during HBS, right? This company. And
No. So I didn't sell it then. In fact, I'll tell you what happened. I love it. Sort of like life gave me a kick in the butt when you're happy, you're content with your goals. You're like, oh, I came from nothing and I created this multi-million-dollar company. Then comes YouTube with the power of Google and $1 billion check, start stealing all our content creators by throwing, millions of dollars at them. And we're like, I don't even know how to play the game at this scale. This was, and I was here and they were playing it at here. So I was like, okay, I don't know how to play this venture capital game. I don't know this, playing a game at this scale. So that's why I came to Harvard Business School, to sort of like expand my horizons, understand what's going on, because we knew this business that we have is not going to sustain the way we are playing it. So sort of that business went into an autopilot mode. My co-founders kept running it. We were still profitable. We continued to remain profitable even through business school. I worked maybe 4 hours a week on that while staying at business school. And post business school, started in the company, which was an online video streaming platform for Indian content. Together, both the first company and the second company, we sold in 2016 to the ticket master of India called Book My Show.
Why did you sell it like so fast, like in 2 years? Why didn't you continue running it and growing it?
A good question. So we started this company after business school because we knew how to make online video scale. We knew how to monetize online video, and we found a niche or geography which was Bollywood content, Indian content, that was untapped. But it was like life was trying to teach me this lesson about not, competing against people or players who you cannot compete against. So 2 years after we started, Amazon Prime Video came into India with multi-billion-dollar check. Disney purchased and launched a company called Hotstar with hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. No VC wanted to back us after that. They're like, how are you guys going to compete against Amazon and Disney? It's not going to happen. We're not going to back this. This space is too competitive. Leave it. And since then, there has not been many anyone else who has competed. It's literally those are the two big players in India. So that was the right decision on behalf of the VCs. We were too foolish to understand it. Even though we had hit certain scale, we were actually doing 10 million MAUs at that point, monthly active users, but realized, okay, you know what, this is not going to get funded more than where we are today. We'll struggle. So we ended up, taking the acquisition.
Gotcha. But in terms of the again, like it's up to you, like if you want to disclose it or not. But in terms of the value for the time invested, like of course you got the positive return, right?
Yeah.
Like how did you think about your next step after you sold to Ticketmaster of India?
I was pretty lost, to be honest, right? Because that company was a large company. I didn't know what to do next. And I had a couple of opportunities to join a large company, to join some mid-stage VC firms that were friends of mine. And fortunately, because of our connections at Harvard Business School, one of our professors, Jeff Busgang, he connected me to a partner at Accel India, who he worked with way back when in Boston. And that introduction led me to sort of exploring the role with Accel. And the people were super amazing, right? For me, it was not the company, the fame of, the brand name of Accel or anything else. It was just the people. The people were amazing. And I was like, you know what? This role is purely about the next, 10, 15 people that I'm going to be working with. So I took up that role with the intent of learning what do great organizations look like? How do investors think? Because so far I played the game on the other side at a much smaller scale. But now I started getting exposure to, okay, what does a multi-billion dollar, company look like? What do the founders think like, right? What does operating at that scale look like? And what do investors look at when investing in companies? So understanding the other side of the table in the picture was extremely helpful. Whether I would be an entrepreneur or not, only time will tell. I always had it that I would love to be, but mentally I was like, you know what, this VC thing seems fun, and I would love to do it, and I would continue doing it. I left Axel a year and a half, like 2 years later, but not because of the job itself. I left because, like I said, I fell in love with this crypto space so much so that my heart, my net worth, my money was all in there. And I was like, I'm 31. If my heart and my passion is in this particular space, I'm spending all my time thinking about it. I go to sleep thinking about it. I wake up thinking about it. What am I doing having a day job as a VC? I should basically go and start a company in this space. If I fail, I fail. It's okay. And that's how, the next company or my next journey at FalconX was born.
That's exactly how I think about food. I go to sleep thinking about food. I wake up about food. So I should think about it. Maybe I should do something with food. Anyway, it's a joke. So you mentioned this amazing insight that the way that the founders think about starting the company and kind of scaling the company is different from the investor point of view. Like, can you elaborate on that? Like, what is the difference, and what are the insights that you got when you started working at Excel?
Good. I wished they taught this to us back at business school. But the most important thing was when founders typically think of ideas or a domain or a space to start a company in, they're like, oh, this is an exciting problem. A lot of people have this problem. So I think I should build some solution around it and maybe people will buy it. That's a wrong way of looking at it, right? If you want to, that's actually completely fine if you want to create a non-venture backed company. But if you want to create a VC backed organization, you have to understand the total addressable market size, right? And I wish people were taught that, how to think about TAM or total addressable market. Like, for example, a lot of times we will think, oh, I am operating in the healthcare industry. Healthcare industry in the US is a $10 trillion industry. So it's a very large TAM. But at the end of the day, the company is selling needles. And then you have to look at, okay, if I'm selling needles, there are 10,000 hospitals, each needle costs $1 each. That is my TAM. And they're buying it X number of times a year, not the entire healthcare industry. I will expand eventually. Doesn't work that way. Most companies don't expand, right? So you have to start looking at, is the main opportunity and the main product that I'm selling large enough that investors will get excited? That's one. And number two, understanding from the point of the VC itself. If, for example, there is a $1 billion fund, $1 billion fund has a mandate that if you're investing in X number of companies, every company should have the potential to return the entire fund from that investment. I'll explain what that even means. A company, typically a fund, will invest X amount of money and seek to get 15 to 20% ownership in the company. Over time, over multiple rounds, that dilutes down to like 10% ownership. So then the fund thinks, by the time of the exit, if I have to earn $1 billion outcome from this, that company has to be worth $10 billion. So the potential should be to have become a $10 billion company for a $1 billion fund. But if I'm selling needles and there's only like it's $100 billion opportunity, they're never going to invest. But most founders are like, I can generate $100 million. It's a large opportunity. Why are these guys not investing? Without the connect that it doesn't make sense for this particular fund because it's a very large fund. All these perspectives I gained only after joining the other side, right? Oh, our investors think about it from this perspective. This is important to them, right? And then again, a lot of other tactical things on how investors think, the connections, each round of financing, etc., etc. But the more important thing was looking at some of the more successful founders, right? Realize that to create certain kind of outcomes, there's certain kind of behaviors and a certain kind of learnings you need to sort of emulate. And observing those successful founders, formed a lot of that intuition that went into creating my next venture.
So what are the patterns that you could see with the successful founders? What type of behaviors you would suggest?
Yeah, couple things. I want to tell you, there is no one particular formula for success. Everybody has their own way of doing things, and that's why there's diversity in this world. But what I was attracted to was what made sense to me. So the things I picked up were, one, successful people first sort of distribution, right? Not just product. In the sense, a lot of the people think if I create a great product, of course the entire universe will come and buy it. That's not how this works, right? First, cracking distribution, right, is number one. Even an average product with phenomenal distribution often becomes a multi-billion dollar company. I mean, take Salesforce, for example, right? It's a very average product, which no one likes. Who's the last person who said they love Salesforce, but they just crack distribution like no one else, right? And they're, $100 billion company. So there are many such examples like this. So thinking distribution first and how to think about distribution pre-product market fit, post-product market fit, and at scale. Like this kind of thinking, I was able to observe. Two, hiring people, right? A lot of successful founders, or almost everyone, I would argue, actually ends up focusing on hiring really good people and setting the bar at a certain stage. And the next person who comes in, raising the bar that, hey, no one else comes below this bar, right? If you have 10 people, the 11th person should raise the bar from the 10th to the 11th. Otherwise, let's not hire because we are good as a company. Let's not just simply put bodies on this problem, right? That kind of thinking about people. And three is actively thinking about culture, right? The best founders I've noticed turn from being players where they actually do things to becoming coaches, where they are empowering the people underneath them to sort of like become the best versions of themselves. Those lessons, while I observed then, did not sink into me personally as well as it has now after going through my own journey repeatedly. So that's an observation.
So, but at the time that you realized that you already had like 3 successful stories, right? So what are the things that you personally attribute to the success of those 3 startups that you did, you personally, or you as a co-founding team? Was it like a passion? Never giving up and kind of just making sure that you would find a way, or was it like the teamwork that you got because you had like 3 good, diverse people and kind of you complemented each other? Like, what are the things that you attribute to the 3 successful startups yourself?
Every journey was different, but one thing was common was for each success, I was able to sort of place myself at the right place at the right time, right? Uh, when internet speeds were taking off from sort of dial up to like 1 Mbps and 1 Mbps to 10 Mbps, like the internet speeds are taking off around the world. People were going from just watching TV on like low quality internet to watching TV on Xbox as well as on the PlayStations way back when and trying to watch HD content, I realized this is the trend and the pattern. People will want to watch more high definition content. People don't want to watch like 240 pixel, 360 pixel video in 10-minute clips, which was what was being offered in it back then. So again, being at the right place, right time, having the right thesis, and just persevering, right? Because it's not easy. Like you may have the right thesis, but it can take 1 year, 2 years for it to pan out, maybe in 3 years. But continuously putting in the effort, not giving up, and having that grit and resilience also mattered. And I would say these things were steady across almost every venture that actually had a successful outcome for me.
So right now, when you're choosing the idea, you kind of you try to find like the right idea at the right time, so that the like the trend kind of is supporting the idea that essentially allows you for mistakes, right? Because if you find an idea that is not supported by the world, right, or by the trends of the world, then essentially like you don't have much room for mistakes as well, right? So is it how you're looking? And that's exactly what you were looking at Excel, because you were looking at the trends, like what are the spaces where the money is flowing into, like what are the ideas or like distribution models that right now are rising? Like, is it the way you thought?
So let me caveat what I've said with something. Look, me as a founder, I like understanding where the market is, where the market is headed, and sort of operating and running businesses in that direction. That said, there are always forces of nature, like Elon Musk, who are like, I don't give a shit about where what the status quo is. I'm going to change the world to my thought process. And look, the world needs more people like that. What I'm saying is, most of us don't operate that way. Most of us are not forces of nature or freaks of nature like him, right? So, in that constraint, in a world where we want to raise VC money, where investors are pattern recognition based thinkers, right? We have to sort of like understand where the world is going, get a clear thesis. Does this make sense now? Is there an opportunity to grow this business now? Not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, and sort of like work towards cracking distribution and product. That's how I think of startups currently.
Yeah. So let's get back to the FalconX, because I mean clearly it's seems like the success story. Can you share your journey within FalconX? Like you exited Excel, you are sleeping and not sleeping and thinking about crypto. Like so, what's next? Like, did you start like from finding a partner, a co-founder, or did you start first with finding an idea? Like, what was your journey?
Yeah, first, I would say I got excited about the space and domain itself, right? And after that, I got my co founder excited about the space too. The specific idea for what FalconX is today got morphed into itself like over the course of the journey because the company, the market, both were evolving. So it's not like the specific idea which the company is today was what we started with. But the domain and the space, we got excited, then the team got excited, and then we started diving in and figuring out along the way.
And how did you find the co-founder?
Um,
Was it a deliberate choice that you want to find the co-founder, or it was just I don't know, like you talked together, you liked each other, you kind of like what was the background? The reason why I'm asking is exactly because when I'm moving to London, I mean that's my idea. I'm actually leaning to having a co-founder because I realized that, I mean, for me it's going to be almost impossible to do it myself. I mean, I just know that I have tendency to have ups and downs, and unfortunately, downs they I wouldn't say they're often, but I mean they happen, and I want to have someone that I can rely on as well. But I wonder, like, what was your at the time, because right now, kind of, you are founding like yourself, but at the time of the FalconX, like, was it a deliberate choice or it just happened naturally that you founded a co-founder?
let's go back to like my origins, right? Like my first company, I had two other co-founders, so we were a team of three, and each person sort of like maintained a different pillar and organization within the company. There was a lot of trust. We went to undergrad together. We sort of like were also very close friends. we were really good at what we did in each other's domains. And so that mattered. So I noticed and observed these patterns in my first three ventures, saying domain expertise, a lot of trust, right? That was important. So when I reflected back on my own journey, I realized, okay, you know what? I'm really good at growth. I'm really good at, cracking distribution. I'm really good at understand this market itself. I'm really good at trading, understanding the space. But someone who understands product and engineering a lot more deeply was thinking around the co-founder for that angle, and that's where my thought process went on finding my next co-founder. And this time around, it's different, right? So this time around, after having a few successful outcomes, the bar gets increased. And I would say the same for you, right? Because you need somebody who can carry equal weightage as you and bring in equal gravitas as you into an organization. You also mature as a person, having gone through enough times of the journey. So I would say finding a co-founder is very much like a marriage. You go through ups, you go through downs. You have to build a lot of trust that that person will stick with you through thick and thin, right? Doesn't matter what happens, because look, just like in your marriage, right? There'll be some days where you're performing your best and some days you're like, I just don't want to do anything. And the person will have to basically give you the leeway, say, you know what, you'll bounce back and you'll basically give your best in some other days. So that level of trust has to be there, that the person will take care of the domain and get stuff done. Now, it takes time to build that relationships, I would say, as you especially age and mature.
Is there kind of like a routine or practice that you advise for the new co-founders to kind of install? Like, I don't know, like not only having the work one-on-ones, but having like I don't know, tradition to go to, I don't know, swim together, or like, is there type of like bonding type of practices or experience that you would suggest, or any type of like the ways that you communicate, or I don't know, like any type of things that strengthen this relationship?
I would say if you're emotionally mature as a person, then you would treat almost every relationship that's important to you in a similar manner, whether it's your parents, whether it's your partner, or whether it's your business partner, right? So I would say treat your co founder in a similar manner. And to build any long-term strong relationship, often, we go through ups and downs. The thing that I advise most younger founders is to work with a coach. Have an exec coach who basically sits down with both of you, ideally once every 2 weeks or once a month, where you're able to sort of air each other's grievances out. You're able to talk through things, because sometimes resentment gets created when there are unsaid things, right? You're like, it's so small, it's a silly thing, but those silly things over time becomes resentment in your mind, just like it would in a relationship. But having a safe space for you to air that and clear me, sometimes it's just like, I thought it was this, but the reality might be very different, right? So having a safe space to vent that out, create that, sort of like bridge that relationship, becomes very important. So this is something I've advised a lot of younger founders who just meet co-founders over, I don't know, a YC meeting, or say, over a bar. So I say, build that relationship, and you need some external mature person who can help you bridge that.
Have you done it yourself? Like, have you done it at any of your startups? Having those kind of joint sessions with the coach?
I never had joint sessions, unfortunately, but I've had individual coaching sessions, and I found them tremendously helpful. And just sort of growing my own emotional maturity, and just getting better with people in general, in all aspects of relationships.
Gotcha. Very, very exciting. So, how was the leaving part from FalconX happening? Like, what was the reasoning behind leaving and kind of starting the new chapter in your life?
So I stepped back after FalconX hit a certain multi-billion-dollar scale. And look, founder transitions are never easy, right? It's like letting your baby grow up and then you leaving home, right? And especially as a founder, your identity gets tied to your role and your position very strongly, right? We're all flaky human beings, so it takes a lot of self-reflection to realize that you're more than your role that you played at work, right? And so for me, it took a couple of months for me to just like disconnect from that work identity. But I'm today very proud and extremely happy to see the company continue succeeding, maintain its leadership, and where the company is headed as well. But for me personally, it was a very rewarding journey emotionally to mature and sort of disconnect my identity from work.
Do you think that kind of you achieved it and never gonna feel the same? In a way that what I'm asking is like you are now kind of scaling your company. Like the startup is like you have this new startup. You're back in the role that you enjoy and that you are good at. But there's gonna be a cycle, I don't know, let's say 5-6 years, when you're gonna be in this next chapter of your life, when you have like in the search of the new idea. Wouldn't you think that it's gonna be more or less exactly the same when you are kind of, because for me, last year it was almost similar to what you are describing, because when I left Sber Market, which is like the number one e-groceries, online groceries in Russia, like for the first 6 months, I didn't know like what to do, and I was searching for the idea. And one of my biggest fears was actually to go to some networking events and to face the question of what I am doing right now, because I didn't have anything to say. I could only say that 6 months ago I was like an important guy who was doing pretty well. But right now I would say like I was afraid to share that I was in a search of the new idea. It's as if I lost my base of self-worth, because I lost this title. So kind of what was the journey for you? And do you think it's like more or less it's going to be the same in 6 years? Okay, we're going to be more prepared, but it's more or less anyway, we're going to be more vulnerable in those kind of periods of life of uncertainty.
Look, I hope for both your sake and my own sake that we don't experience it to the extent that we did the first time around or the last time around, because not only are we growing mentally and maturing emotionally, right? We're also aging. So we are tying our identities to things more than work, right? Just like how you're tying your identity as a parent to Mira, or many other aspects of your life that we've discussed previously. So as you start associating with other aspects, I think you feel less tied to just your work identity. And I hope that is the case for me, and I don't go through the same emotional turmoil that I did last time around. Because once you realize that this is a journey that will keep repeating itself, like you're gonna change different careers. You're not going to be like, look, there are a few people like Zuck who are like, okay, I created Facebook and I'm going to keep running Facebook till I die, which is great. But a lot of other people will have changing identities over time. And I realize I'm one of those people. I'm going to keep doing different things. In the next 30-40 years, I'll probably like start 4-5 more companies. And I cannot, it's not like I end one and I start the next one the next day. There's going to be a gap. And during that gap, I want to use that time to recharge, figure out, get to become a better version of myself, and I'll come back better, stronger, right? So once you realize that, I think you look at it slightly differently, and I hope I do as well. If not, send me this podcast back 6 or 7 years from now.
Perfect. I will do. So what did you help you in this turmoil? Like, what are the practices, habits, I don't know, new experiences that kind of helped you to transition from FalconX to this new startup that you are so excited about?
It wasn't a straightforward journey, to be very honest, Hassan. I went through all the existential questions that you just mentioned, right? And also went through the questions of, oh, do I ever want to do anything again? Right? It's okay. Like I'm fine. Why should I put myself through this torture or pain if I must? Maybe I'll just go back to being a VC, right? It's a lot more easier. It's easier to ask questions than to be answering the questions, if you think about it. But I went on this path of trying to discover my why, which was the most challenging part. And, honestly, there is no straightforward answer to this. And I got lucky, if anything. I used to meditate before, but meditation only gave me like a little bit of temporary peace. What was a transformative experience for me personally was going through Vipassana. So in 2023, exactly this time last year, June of last year, I went for, no, around May, I think. Yeah, I'm forgetting now. I went for a 10-day silent meditation retreat, right? And that was, one of those things in your life where you clearly know in hindsight it's going to be a step function game changer for you, right? So it was 10 days of no communication with anyone, purely looking inwards, understanding yourself better, right? Understanding your desires, understanding your aversions, understanding your fears at your deep subconscious level. Once you understand them, you acknowledge them, you start, towards the journey of getting over them. And for me, that helped me sort of like get a lot more clarity towards the current stage of my life, as well as the next few stages of my life, hopefully.
I mean, of course, it's a very personal question, so feel free to kind of to answer as you like. But what were the main insights that you got from this 10-day experience?
It's hard to summarize even in one podcast, but if I were to summarize in a nutshell, in those 10 days, and meditation is, I would say, a clickbait title for what Vipassana is. Vipassana is a mind training institute. It teaches you how to master your own mind. And what do I mean by that? You learn the skill to sort of bridge the gap between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. They're both there, but because of all the daily noise and the inputs and our thoughts and like our actions and our activities and our calendars, we're just like, it's always disconnected. But when you remove all of those things, when there's nothing to do for 10 whole days, right, you're only looking inwards, you suddenly start realizing that the gap between your conscious and your subconscious mind gets bridged. And you start really, it's just fascinating. You start unlocking every memory that has been stored in your subconscious mind since probably the time you were born. It's all there, right? And you start understanding the power between your mind and your physical body. I'll give you a very specific example, and this again is my journey and my version of what I experienced. I'm not saying everybody will experience the same thing. Everybody's on their own path and everybody will experience it very differently. I walked into Vipassana with extreme amount of physical pain. I had just undergone a surgery for my knee a couple months ago, and while I had recovered from the surgery after being on crutches for a long time, I was having a lot of pains in my knees because you lose a
were on
lot of muscle
crutches.
mass.
I didn't see you. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
You hadn't seen me then. I was in crutches for a long time, and then when you're in crutches for a while, you start losing muscle mass in your legs. And then I started going for physiotherapy so that I can start recovering from that. And during the process of my physiotherapy, I had an L4, L5 slip disc on my spine, and that was extremely painful, to the point where I was on a cocktail of muscle relaxants and neurological painkillers every day. And one of the things about that is it helps you numb the pain, but the pain doesn't get resolved. And over time, the dosage that you're taking just gets nullified. You have to keep increasing the dosage. And so when you're in a cocktail of painkillers and muscle relaxants, your mind becomes a vegetable. You can't, it's like brain fog all the time, right? And combine extreme physical pain with mental brain fog, and that was the cocktail recipe. I was like, I just need to go to a place where I can clear my mind. And that's why I went for Vipassana. But the magical thing for me was I was going for physiotherapy 3 times a week just to survive, in addition to all these medical things. And one day before my Vipassana, I went to my physiotherapist and I was like, man, I can't even sit. I could not sit on the floor with my legs down, even for a minute. He's like, you signed up for this. Why did you sign up if you know that you can't sit? It's like, put your back against the wall and manage through the pain. So the first 3, 4, 5 days were excruciatingly painful for me physically. But on the 6th day, something magical happened. And I can't describe it with just words. Once you start bridging the gap between your conscious and your subconscious mind, and you're able to sort of tap into all your memories, all your negative thoughts, your positive thoughts, and everything, your fears, and start releasing them and letting them go, all your physical pains also start going away. By day 6, my back pain issues were gone, my knee pain issues were gone. I could sit on the floor, cross legged, for a whole 1 hour without even moving an inch for even a second. And knock on wood, a year later, I still don't have any of these back pain issues or knee pain issues. Right? It was just like a magical thing. Like doctors are like, you have to probably get a spine surgery done. So going from that to coming out 10 days later saying, you know what, I can do like a full pigeon pose in yoga style, like was a magical experience. Right. In addition to that, again, the physical benefits, there's just a lot of inner benefits for your own emotional maturity and growth. So Vipassana, like I said, was for me a very magical, transformative experience that unlocked the power of the mind and gave me lessons that I'll carry through the rest of my life.
Thanks for sharing. It's incredible, and to some extent, I feel it as well. Not probably to this extent that you had, because you had those 10 days. But one of my happiest moments is exactly when I meditate in the Sea of Cyprus, which is like such a kind, actually, sea, very calm sea. And sometimes I speak to the sea. You might think of me as crazy and kind of drop off from the conversation, but I mean, that's exactly the times I think that is you describe as probably my subconscious kind of go-to consciousness. And actually it happens, of course, like usually on the closer to the 25th, 30th minute. It never comes on the 6th minute. On the 6th minute, it's more about how I'm excited to meet Prab, but I'm also stressed to meet Prab. Like what question should I ask him first? Like those type of things that I just meditated, right? Like before our call. But on the 30th, kind of like you have this feeling of gratitude, of kind of like, for me personally, living in a place that I'm so much grateful to, because those were 2 years of a turmoil in my life and my family's life, because we had to relocate from Russia, which we didn't want to. Anyway, I mean, it's going to be such a like simplification of what you said, but do you think that the turmoil and the pains in the health that you had could be that you connected your self-love, self-worth to what you create in the world, like to the startups you found, that as if like if you don't do something good for the world, or I don't know, someone can say it's money, someone can say it's ego, when it's like more, I don't know, like more how do you call it, like positive, it's about creation in the world. But in any case, whatever you call it, you connect your self-love to your activities, and you kind of, and you don't get self-love when those activities kind of fade. So do you think, was it at the core of the situation that you found yourself? And the reason why I'm asking is because I attributed kind of my low experience to this kind of feeling that I'm only deserving love when I do something good. And that's something that kind of like, from some extent, it gains my energy from me when I feel low. But at some moments, I actually appreciate this idea because it gives me the power kind of to start new things, I don't know, to push through, etc. So, but if you don't control it, and to some extent, like I didn't control it in the first phases of my life, I'm not sure if I'm controlling it right now, but I mean, at least I became much more aware. So what do you think? Like, is it the similar dynamics that you had that got you to these health problems?
My health problems were sort of self-inflicted, in the sense like I broke my ACL doing Krav Maga, which was a street fighting art form, martial arts form.
Wow, I
So
didn't know that you did it. Okay.
so I broke my leg during that, and then I did not get my surgery done for like 6 years, and so it was self-inflicted in that sense. It was less mental, more like stupidity, but there is the continued pain that exist and that continue to exist. I know now, at least I believe now, are manifested through our mind, and we have the power to release them, right? And the burdens that you just spoke of, like as a founder, once you tied your identity to sperm market and the fact that you were a very successful person at this really large organization, and then now when you would go out to these conferences and people would ask you what are you up to next, you added this weight of other people's expectations on your own shoulders, saying I owe the world a responsibility or a response, saying I need to do something meaningful and add value to this world. And that mental weightage becomes physical for you, and it starts manifesting into like physical pain. That again, that was my experience. When you start, first 50% of the job is acknowledging that that's what cost it. The remaining 50% is learning the skill to sort of like release that burden mentally, right? Because once you start releasing that mental burden of expectations from others or even from yourself, because outcomes doesn't matter how much you do. Sometimes just market and luck and unfortunate thing can happen. The only thing you have in your control is, can you give your best to the best extent that you can on all the days that you can, right? And then outcomes, if they happen, they happen. They won't happen, they won't happen, right? And along the way of the journey, can you become a better person than you were yesterday versus tomorrow versus the next year? And then, man, if not this company, the next company, the one after that, you will hit success, right? So that's become my philosophy as of late, than having all these burdens and expectations that we started deploying on ourselves. Because a stressful version of us never creates successful outcomes, right? When work becomes joy, when every day feels like fun, right? When the people you're working with feels like, man, I would, even for free, I would be doing this. That's when the best version of you comes out. And so I would like push you to sort of like create that environment for yourself. I have at least sort of self-created for now that version of myself. So I would push that for everyone if you have that freedom and opportunity.
I would probably disagree to some extent. Maybe I didn't get you
Go for it.
get you right, but essentially, I do not believe in a state that you can always be happy. Like it doesn't matter, and especially if you're founding the company and scaling the company, because you would always have like ups and downs, and kind of, I like this like saying that like as a human we are kind of like we have those ups and downs, and
Let's
and
talk about that a little bit. Tell me about unhappy moments for you as a founder.
Let's take like yesterday. I had this good candidate for the role that I'm looking for the last 1 year, which is essentially like a chief marketing officer for the company that I'm leading right now, which is called Power. It has an amazing product. It has an amazing like a founder. She does an amazing kind of like courses. We do courses that help parents to kind of raise their children's skills. And the challenge that I have is I need the person who can help me scale the company from the distribution side. Exactly what you said as the number one criteria for the successful entrepreneurs. And like literally in the last year, I probably interviewed 100 people, and I wasn't able to find the right fit essentially. And this guy was like, from the resume perspective, was amazing. But that was probably the worst interview that I had in those 100 interviews, because this guy was super arrogant. As if he was not interested in the interview. And to tell you the truth, I started to be nervous when I was interviewing him, because I kind of had this expectation that I finally need to close this role. And at the same time, I tell you the truth, like when there is the other person who is angry, I kind of start to some extent to be a little bit nervous. And then, self-talk started to came into my mind. Man, you created a company which was valued at some moment like $1 billion company within Russia. Like you did it successfully. And now you get nervous in front of some, like, I don't know, like arrogant bastard. And also, why the fuck you haven't hired in the last 1 year, like a normal, like a good CMO, even though you consider yourself, because it's another identity that I have, is that I'm a successful CEO. I'm a successful guy I'm a successful leader who knows how to hire. And in the last year, I'm not kind of finding. And at the moment, like after the interview, I literally had 1 or 2 hours of a low moment and kind of having those ideas in my mind. I kind of walked, I meditated, and it kind of dissuaded. So right now I'm content. I'm kind of having exactly the same idea that you are sharing. like just show up. When you show up, kind of good things is going to happen for us. Just show up. Don't do like stupid things twice. I mean, do new things that could become stupid, but at least kind of don't do them twice exactly the same, but just show up and the good things is going to happen, and I'm going to get the good person and we're going to scale the company. But what I'm trying to tell you is that at the moment I felt kind of, I wouldn't say lost, but I felt down and I felt kind of a negative self-talk in my mind for the 2 hours after the interview.
Got it. Very good example, Asan. So let's go back to Asan from 10 years ago, right? If Asan were to go through that same experience, do you think Asan would have been felt low for 2 hours or 2 days?
No, definitely 2 or 3 days for sure.
Right. So
but the Asan 10 years ago would probably be super angry as well at the same time. I'm super angry at the time as well, but my angriness to some extent pushes me to, you know what I mean? So 10 years ago, the angriness was so big at the same time. So it kind of correlated the insecurity of myself and the angriness that I don't want to be in this place and that I want to achieve no matter what, because if I don't achieve it, I don't deserve love. To some extent, it's a negative motivation, but it pushes you to achieve. Even though kind of like you start to gain weight, you start to, I don't know, like go partying because you don't cope with stress. You know what I mean, right?
I do.
And right now, I think my cycle is much less. Probably the result, hopefully, it's going to be the same or even better. But the pain is much less, I agree with you, than it used to be 10 years ago, for sure.
Right. So you learn to regulate your emotions far better over time. And the point I'm trying to convey is, once you acknowledge that it's a skill of emotional regulation, then it's like going to the gym. You can lift 5 kg once, then you can lift 10 kg, and 1 year from now you can lift 40 or 50 kg, and lifting 5 kg feels instant. So from 2 days, you brought it to 2 hours, you can bring it down to 2 minutes, and you can bring it down to near instant. Being able to like feel that low, acknowledge that you're feeling low, realize and acknowledging how you're feeling in your body, be like, you know what, it's okay. It's a learning opportunity. This is fantastic for me that I struggle in interviewing these kind of people, arrogant people. I feel nervous. This is great. I need to work on this for myself. That self-recognition, that self-learning will go from 2 hours, because in 2 hours, you're probably able to go through all of these emotions and be like, this is an opportunity, I'll not go through this again, right? You'll be able to do it in normal, almost near instantaneous thing. You just have to learn to build that skill. And when you do that, like I said, almost every moment you'll feel like, okay, fine, it's a learning opportunity or it's a great opportunity. There's nothing else in between. There's no reason to like have those emotional fluctuations repeatedly.
So 1 year passed after Vipassana. Do you feel that the effect is fading away, or kind of that you need to kind of like really like learn the skill, continue learning the skill, continue doing Vipassana like once in 3 years? Like, what is your thinking right now?
Yeah, again, using the gym analogy, like as some 10 days of Vipassana is like 10 days of intense mental exercise boot camp, right? You feel great coming out of 10 days of gym, but if you don't work out every day, 1 year from now, you'll feel as weak as you were before. So meditation is just mental exercise. I have continued to maintain that practice, although I admit not to the same extent as which they do recommend that we do, because again, they are all excuses, just life, circumstances, everything else. If you don't invest the time, you don't get the same output. So yes, the output has faded. Do I want to do this once every 3 years? I would like to do it. My ideal wish is I do it once every year for the rest of my life, if I can, so that I keep the habit of going back into this practice. Because like anything, the effect starts fading away the minute you stop giving it less love and less attention. So my one message to myself from this would be like, hey, go back to doing this once a day, twice a day if I can, and make some time for myself to go back to Vipassana sometime this year.
How does your daily routine or weekly routine look like? Do you have like a daily meditation and like a weekend meditation that you try to adhere to?
I try to go for what they have on Saturday, Sundays. Sundays is a half day meditation. So Vipassana, I live in Dubai, and in Dubai there is a couple of centers where they do weekend half day meditation sessions. And they call it 1 day meditation, but it's like from 8 a.m. to like 2 p.m. So I do that because that brings me back into the state of like having attention and focus for a couple of hours, brings me back into that calm state. And then I try to maintain this on a daily basis. Look, I must admit, my ideal wish is I would do it for an hour, but sometimes some fire is burning, something is going on, so I do it for half an hour if I can, or I even
Is
try
it
for
in the
10 minutes.
mornings? In the mornings before your first call?
Mornings is when I find the highest value because every time I tell myself I'll do it in the afternoon, by half of the day when it's done, I'm like, oh, I would rather just go sleep, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't work. Mornings is when I see the best outcome. I feel extremely calm. I feel super productive. I feel super focused when I do it in the mornings.
Gotcha. So, what are the other like life-changing experiences that you had like Vipassana? Like the ones that you say that kind of like impacted the way you live?
Deep. Let's think. No, it's a very
You mentioned
genuine.
Dubai University and probably the business school as the ones, or
Yeah. So there's several that come to mind. And look, every up and every down and every painful experience that we go through in life become the formula for who we end up becoming as a person. So that said, the key things that come to mind when you ask me this question are during my undergrad, at the end of my third year of engineering, I read this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a very cliche book, but that gave me the confidence in myself when I was running this blog of my mind that I don't want to pursue a job. I want to actually create wealth for myself using my own strength and my own skills, and by creating my own, sort of crafting my own entrepreneurial path. So I would attribute my thinking at that time towards this book. So that was like one standout moment for me in my life. Second standout moment would be, while applying for business schools in 2012, 11, actually, I had almost gone to UT Austin. But a friend of mine who I studied GMAT with insisted, that I apply to HBS. And I did not want to. And I was like, how? I don't think I'm good enough to get into Harvard. Just like, no. Apply. You never know. This is the only time you're ever applying to business schools. What do you lose by trying? It's $200. Just go and apply. $200 was not some small amount, but I still did. And yet here we are, we met at business school. So that was a key moment number two. A key transformative moment number three would be when I ended up joining Excel, because those lessons, those people from then continue to remain in my life, continue to be a key force and power source of strength for me, right? And continue to be my mentors and my friends. Another key moment would be when in 2016 I downloaded the Ethereum node and I started venturing down this crypto path. It created my entire career for the last 8-9 years. These are the things that come to mind. And I would say more lately, the fifth thing I would add is this whole Vipassana experience last year.
Do you think that the summer in Paris in 2013 would hit this list?
So for our listeners here,
what do you remember about this trip?
Yeah, I feel blacked out pretty much, but so I went to Paris to spend 3 days with Hassan. But I fell in love with the city of Paris, and I canceled all my travel plans to Barcelona and Madrid and everything after that. Ended up spending 9 or 10 days. Hassan was working at Paris Saint-Germain at the time at the football
Paris
club.
Saint-Germain, yeah. Exactly.
Yes, and then we had a lot of fun. We explored the city, did a lot of crazy things, lots of good memories. Fortunately, there were no transformative experiences for either of us that set us off on a different path, but very memorable experiences nonetheless.
and we yet to
Repeat
do
our
it at
Paris
least.
trip.
Yeah, exactly. We need to do it at some anniversary.
Sure.
So probably the concluding questions. If you would be talking to yourself, so imagine that there are like different realities, right? And there is a reality that is in the future, and that's the future that you are already, like there is already Prab there in the future. Let's say you're 80 years old or 100 years old, like whatever, but you are going to be this Prab in this future, and you are talking from the future to yourself today. So what are the things that you would wish or say from the future to yourself today?
The advice, now this is like 80-year-old me giving advice to 37-year-old me. I've come back and tell myself that everything that I need to know from here for the next 40 years, 99.5% of it you already know. The success, or the secret to happiness, not even success, the secret to happiness from here or the rest of your life is not going to be to add more things, but to start eliminating things. So subtraction is going to be the key to my happiness, which means eliminating things that don't work, eliminating people that don't work, eliminating habits that don't work, right? More knowledge, more reading, more absorption, more things, more anything is not going to be the key to my happiness, right? Focusing on the few things that matter, looking inwards, spending time knowing who I am. I've come to realize I know only 1% of who I am as a person. There's so much to unlock and learn about myself. So everything I need to know is right here within myself, the secret to my happiness or my sorrows. And so I would advise myself to look inwards as much as I can over the next 40 years. And hopefully I'll be a more wise person by the time I'm 80.
Thank you, Prab. Prab, I really appreciate it. And I love you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Barry. It was fun doing this with you.